Hello there, finance friends. Welcome to lecture 3. In this lecture, we're going to be turning our attention to the ideas of cash management and credit and debt management. So now that we've understood a bit about the principles, the basic ideas of personal finance, and we know time value of money, we're going to extend our analysis a little bit, extend our knowledge, and figure out some broad ideas and some key principles to either managing your cash or managing your credit and debt. Start off at a kind of a top level, and then we'll slowly take it down to a more granular, detailed level. So in terms of an overview, we had mentioned at the beginning in our first lecture that as I teach this, there's 4 main buckets of personal financial activity. And that second budget was managing your money well on a day-to-day basis. And that included knowing the time value concepts. It includes things, for example, like running your taxes well. But really, the main part about using your money well on a day-to-day basis, it ultimately comes down to managing the ways that you will pay for the things that you consume and the ways that you will fund your investments. We know that we have to consume things to get by, and we know that we need to invest. That was our third bucket in order to grow our assets. So a fundamental question in personal finance is, how are you going to pay for your expenditures for consumption, and how are you going to fund your investments? And when you think about it, there's really only 2 sources that you can tap into to achieve those. So you basically have 2 sources of money. You have money that you own, in other words, your own cash, or money that you borrow, someone else's cash. So when it comes to your decisions on how you're going to pay for your day-to-day expenditures and how you're going to fund your investments, and we're using investments here broadly, it could be everything from buying a car, buying a house, buying other assets, everything in between. You can either source it from money that you yourself own, that's your cash, or you can source it from money that you borrow, which is someone else's cash. This sort of leads to a couple of ideas that tie back into earlier concepts from opening lecture. It's really, really important that you train yourself and discipline yourself to live below your means and to run net cash flow positive. If you can set up a good budget, have some fiscal discipline, live below your means, and run net cash positive, you're going to be able to save money. That's the key. Running net cash positive, spending below your income, living below your means, it leaves you free cash flow that you can then save. And then later, once you've saved, you can deploy that free cash flow. So again, running net cash flow positive, the chain of thinking is you run net cash positive, you have surplus cash, and then later on, you can use that surplus cash down the line to finance your big investments and your big purchases. And in the meantime, while you're saving up by putting your money in the bank, and there's lots of different types of tools that we'll learn about, you can deploy that money in the short term and earn some interest. Interest is, for example, when you put money in the bank is using your money. Interest is the price that you're able to charge the bank for using your money. Or seen differently, interest, when it's your money, is the reward that you get for saving. Now, on the other hand, sometimes if you run net cash flow negative, you're going to have to borrow money. When you borrow money, there's still interest involved, or anytime money is traded, there's interest involved. When you borrow money, there's still interest involved, except that this time you're not collecting the interest, you're paying the interest. And the interest that you pay, that is the price that you pay for having access to somebody else's cash. Now, obviously, there's times when you'll have some free cash flow and some savings, and you'll still choose occasionally to borrow money, and we'll discuss that. But as a general concept, you can either consume with or invest with money that you own, your cash, for which you earn interest in the short term, or money that you borrow from someone else's cash, and you're going to pay interest. Okay. The other big idea from the overview perspective comes down to what kinds of assets should you consider borrowing money to pay for. We learned in an earlier lecture that while on the balance sheet, assets can be seen as cash assets or liquid assets and personal possessions and investment assets and even real property assets like a house, not all assets behave the same. Some stay stable in value, some depreciate in value, some appreciate in value. So the general idea, the kind of the broad principle is, if you're going to borrow money, it should really only be to buy long-term assets that will appreciate in value. You're still going to do a cost-benefit analysis, but for some things, maybe an education, maybe a home, borrowing money and taking on the interest charges is a price worth paying. Okay, so a decent rule is that, I guess we can even say this is good debt. Sounds counterintuitive, but maybe we can classify some debt as good debt. And that means it's debt that's used to buy assets that are going to appreciate in value, grow your wealth, help you to achieve the goals of that third bucket. Bad debt would be debt that either you cannot afford, where the interest drowns you, or debt that's used to finance, things that depreciate in value, personal possessions, cars, things like that. Okay. So going back to this, I also want to get something up here. So we know that you're going to need to spend or consume. This can come from money, what we're going to call cash you own, or from cash that you borrow. The rest of this lecture is going to cut those in two, and we're going to look at the different ways that cash that you own and cash that you borrow behave. And we're going to pay special attention to how interest is calculated and how interest can benefit you through the value of time if it's your money, but how it can hurt you if it's someone else's money. So let's start off with cash management, and then we'll go later to credit and debt management. So we know that from the balance sheet, assets can be classified as either cash assets or liquid assets, personal property possession assets, investment assets, and real property like a house asset. Cash management is a very important subset of our second bucket. That is the idea of using your money smartly, wisely, prudently on a day-to-day basis. Cash management, and unfortunately, personal finance often has lots and lots of jargon, a lot of ideas where a lot of times you'll see multiple terms meaning the same thing. Same thing happens here. So we can call it cash management. Sometimes you'll hear it called monetary asset management. Sometimes you'll hear it called liquidity management. The terms are used interchangeably, so don't be confused. What is it? Well, there's a couple of definitions. A simple definition is that cash management is the process of managing and investing your cash for the short term. That's not a bad one. Oftentimes, by the way, when we say investing cash for the short term, we simply mean putting it into a savings account. When we're going to use the term investment here, it's the deploying of investing is deploying your cash to grow it. It doesn't have to be into stocks or bonds or mutual funds. Even putting your spare cash into a savings account or a certificate of deposit or a money market account, because that will grow your money through interest, we can call that investing. Okay, so that's one definition. I think another definition, a little bit bigger, a little bit longer, but probably a bit stronger, is Cash management is the task of maximizing your interest earnings and minimizing the fees on all of the funds that you keep available for your day-to-day expenses, emergencies, and savings and investment opportunities. In other words, this second definition says cash management is basically how do you handle your money, the money that you need for your very short-term, day-to-day needs, purchasing, consumption, living. How do you manage that money how do you manage your cash in such a way that you can handle all of these things while maximizing the interest that you earn and minimizing the fees? Okay, so those are basic definitions. Note the big idea here. We're talking about short term. We're talking about very, very short term. Eventually, when you bank up enough savings, you're going to deploy that into other investments, which will be considered more long term. Okay, so although sometimes savings and investing can be used synonymously, and different people look at it differently, one easy way to look at it is to say the money that I'm setting aside right now in the short term, that's my savings. Once that pool of savings gets big enough, I can take a chunk of it and deploy it into more traditional investments. And again, in this short term, we're not just saving, but we're also thinking about how can we handle our day-to-day bill pay? How can we handle our day-to-day consumption? How can we basically get by? So that's cash management. Now, the problem, it sounds nice and simple, and it's really not complicated, but there's an inherent problem in cash management. And the basic problem is, as in everything in economics, we have a trade-off. Okay, there's always a trade-off in economics. No exception here, because at the heart of cash management is a critical trade-off between three conflicting goals: earning interest, maintaining liquidity, and keeping your money safe. In a perfect world, you can do all three things. Your money would grow nicely, growing through interest. That's that interest rate from the time value stuff. So in a perfect world, you could grow your money aggressively and maintain liquidity, meaning always have access to it, and keep your money safe, meaning it's never going to lose value. Unfortunately, you can't do all three of those. There's an inherent trade-off. Let's first kind of sort out what these three things are. Okay, so number one, interest is at its core the money that you earn from deploying your assets. Interest is also called return. So you'll hear, what's your return, what's your yield, what's your gain, but it's the return, the interest that you earn on your money. Liquidity, we know from our opening lecture when we showed that balance sheet, we know that liquidity is synonymous with how easily can your asset be converted to cash. We know that cash, by definition, is purely liquid. And then as we move down the balance sheet, the assets get less and less liquid. So maybe, cash is very liquid, savings accounts very liquid. You can even argue that, stocks and bonds and investments they're fairly liquid too. If they're in a retirement account, you won't have access to them easily, or you'll have to pay a penalty, but it's sort of liquid. On the other extreme, maybe a car, not so liquid, and a home, a house, whether it's a residential property, a rental property, or a commercial property, houses and other real property assets tend to be highly illiquid. It takes a long time, relatively speaking, to convert that asset into cash, okay? And liquidity is important because liquidity is how you pay your expenses. You can't pay for food with a house. You can't pay for food with a share of stock. You need to have cash or a cash equivalent to pay for it. That's liquidity, very important. And of course, the third idea is safety. Is your asset going to be subject to financial risk? In other words, can your asset lose value? So we've got these three big ideas: interest, liquidity, and safety. The goal again up here would be to do all three great, but you're not going to do all three great because there's always a trade-off. And we can summarize that trade-off right here. Basically, what we're going to say is the more liquid an asset is, think about just pure cash in your pocket, or in your drawer versus a house or a stock or a mutual fund share. The more liquid an asset is, number one, the more useful it is on a daily basis. You can buy stuff with it, pay bills with it, eat with it. It's also going to be safer. Now, we'll take aside for the moment, we'll strip aside the impact of inflation. If you put $20,000 into the bank today, and again, we'll ignore inflation, you're going to have $20,000 in the bank tomorrow and a year from now and 5 years from now. So it's going to be safe, and that's a good thing. So liquidity makes it useful on a daily basis. It makes it safe in terms of what we're going to call principal protection, protecting the value of your cash. But the trade-off is, and we'll put this in a different color, it's going to offer you a very low return. Cash does not grow in value rapidly. The assets that we can invest in that will grow in value or maybe not rapidly, but the assets that we invest in that we expect traditionally to grow in value, to appreciate, to generate wealth for you, they tend to not be all that liquid, and they're definitely going to have some risk involved. So that's the trade-off, and your key job is to find the right tools to achieve what you need to achieve given that trade-off. Okay. There's a lot of different tasks in cash management, but I would offer to you, as you're starting your journey, you have two big tasks. So we're going to say that you have two main tasks in cash management. And again, here, we're going back to our metaphor of getting the right tools for the job. You've got some jobs that you got to achieve. You got some things that you have to do. What are the tools to achieve them? So your first main task is to get the right accounts opened. This sounds very easy. It is very easy. Ultimately, what we're talking about here, this is sort of like infrastructure. Your first task is to build the appropriate infrastructure, or if you don't like that term, architecture. It's like you're an architect and you're trying to build the ideal setup, the ideal system, so that all of your needs are met in a seamless, easy, automated, foolproof way. That's going to require that you open the right accounts and that you do it at the right institutions. What kind of accounts do you need? Well, we set up here that you're trying to achieve tools for the job. Think of the accounts as the tools. Then the question is, what are the jobs? And the jobs are some of these. You want to have a place where all of your income can be deposited into and all of your bills can be paid out of. In other words, you want to have a central hub to hold your money. A central hub where all of your income can deposit into and all your bills can pay out of. And that's going to be your checking account generally. You want to have in your infrastructure a way to handle, to automate both your bill pay for all your expenses and also your savings. Because remember, we're always going to PYF. We're always going to pay yourself first. You want to make sure that you have adequate liquidity, that you have enough cash so that you can cover your day-to-day needs. Imagine as an extreme case, a person who has a house. The house will say is paid off. There's no mortgage. They're debt-free. We'll even say the house is worth $5 million, but they have zero cash in the bank or in their pocket. Well, on paper, they're a millionaire. Hell, they're a millionaire 5 times over. But if they have no liquidity, if they have no cash, they're not going to be able to pay for food, to pay for gas, let alone to pay for the utilities or the property taxes for that home. So it's great to have a lot of wealth. It's great to be a millionaire, but it can't all be in illiquid assets, or you'll starve to death or freeze to death or have your house foreclosed on because you can't pay your property taxes. So your third task here, your third job, you want to have adequate liquidity just to cover your needs. You also want to have emergency funds. We need that rainy day fund because life's going to throw us curveballs. We know that we want to have, it depends. Some people want anywhere from 6 to 9 months. Some people, if they're more conservative, they like 12 to 15 months. But you're going to need to set a threshold number of months and start building up your cash reserves, building up your emergency fund so you can cover that. So you can fill up that account and sleep well at night, knowing that if something bad happened, maybe you lose your job, you have an unexpected expense, you have a car repair, your water heater at your house pops, all these things that happens because life throws us curveballs. We want to make sure that we have the emergency funds set up, and we want to have them so that they're safe and that we can easily get them. You would never want to have emergency funds in, for example, a property, because if something bad happens and you have to sell the property to get the money out, that might take you months. And when life throws you curveballs, you want that cash right away. And then ultimately, with all this cash, we want to make sure that we minimize fees so that we can earn some decent returns. So we want to set up an infrastructure that helps us achieve these goals. Once you have those accounts, once you have that infrastructure, then you're going to link the accounts. You're going to link the accounts so that all of your system, from your money at your job coming into your account, to all your fixed expenses being paid on your credit card, to your credit card being paid automatically at the end of the month in the full amount so you don't pay interest, to money getting diverted from your savings into your PYF funds. You want to have that whole system automated. In other words, we're going to recognize that ultimately we're all just sort of dumb primates. And we're tempted every day to make dumb financial moves. So what we're really trying to do is build an automated structure that works and, if I dare say, is human proof, foolproof. You just set it and you walk away and you live your life, and you know that you've got this great system in the background bringing money from your job and other income into your account, automating your bill pay, automating your credit card payment, automating your savings, automating your investment. So your life, your financial life at least, it just runs. And those are your two main tasks. Set something up, set up all your accounts, and then link them in a great architecture and a great infrastructure. Okay. Now, the final thing I want to discuss in cash management, and then we'll turn to credit, I do want to talk a little bit about interest. We've been saying that interest is the amount of money that you earn on cash that you own. You put money in the bank, you loan money out, you earn interest. So interest in the context of cash management is the return that you get on cash that you own. And here is the basic formula. Interest is equal to P times R times T. In other words, the interest that you earn is equal to the principal, which is the amount of cash that you have at play, multiplied by the interest rate, multiplied by the amount of time that your money is deployed. So this is a great formula. It's the formula for what we're going to call simple interest. And once again, I equals PRT. Now, it's a very straightforward concept. One little kind of sort of, not a glitch, but one little special case. Almost always when you earn interest, it's just paid on the full amount of cash that you have in your account. Or if you buy a financial instrument like a bond or something like that, well, not in this case, but if you like a corporate bond, we'll say, your interest is based on the face value of the bond. So generally speaking, most of the time, the interest that you earn is a function of the amount of money that's in your account or the face value of the asset that you bought. However, there is a unique category of investments that are called discount instruments. It's another tool for the job, and they're great. There's nothing wrong with them. They just behave a little bit differently. With a discount instrument, you actually buy the asset at a price below their nominal value. In other words, the asset has a face value, you pay below the face value. Then finally, when the asset matures and then you redeem it, you get back the face value. So you redeem it at face value, and the difference is the interest that you earn. Sounds complicated. So the classic example is the US Treasury bill. And it would work something like this. These numbers are just illustrative hypothetical, okay? Let's say that you are looking to buy a bond, a US Treasury bill that has a face value of $1,000. This means that the bond has a stated value of $1,000. What's going to happen is when you buy that bond, you're going to buy it at a price below $1,000. So hypothetically, you're going to buy it for $920. I'm just making this up. Since you're paying a lower amount than the bond's face value, you're paying a discount, hence discount instrument. So you're going to pay less money than the face value. When the bond finally matures and you redeem it, you're going to get the face value back. So basically, you buy it below face value, you redeem it at face value, and the difference in this case, $1,000 minus $920 or 80, that represents the interest that you effectively earn while you hold the asset waiting for it to mature. Okay, so that's a discount instrument. Generally, interest is very easy. There's a couple of real simple formulas. They're on this slide right here. So take a quick minute and write this stuff down. But there's some basic formulas that we always use in finance to calculate the returns on cash. Okay. One of the, obviously the most basic formula, one of them is the effective interest rate. So if you buy an asset and you want to figure out what the interest that it, like what your effective interest rate that you earned on the asset is, it's just going to be the amount of interest that you earned divided by the amount of money that you invested or deposited. This is a really common, broad idea. The amount that you earn divided by what you paid to earn that amount, that's your effective return, your effective yield, your effective interest rate. Now, sometimes, generally, when you buy an asset and you earn interest, you have to pay tax on that interest. Okay, interest is considered income, and we'll learn this in a later lecture. Income is taxed. So it's usually not smart to just say, oh, that was my effective interest rate and stop. Instead, you want to go to what we're going to call your after-tax return. Because really, it doesn't matter how much money you earn. What really matters is what did you keep after taxes. So after-tax return is going to be equal to your before-tax return, which was basically the number that we got up here, your effective interest rate. And we're going to multiply that by 1 minus your tax rate. We'll learn about marginal tax rates in a later lecture, but for now, just notice that 1 minus your tax rate has to be a number below 1. So if you have a tax rate of 20%, then 1 minus 20% is going to be 0.80. If you multiply your before tax return times 0.80, that basically means you're only keeping 80% of the interest that you made and you're paying the rest in taxes. Okay? So that's our second one, and that's the common situation. However, there are a few assets, including one called municipal bonds, where the interest that you earn is actually tax-free. Up here in number 2, we had to reduce our return to account for taxes that we had to pay. Well, if the interest that you earn is exempt for tax, we're going to go the other way and account for that. We're going to call this the ETY, the effective taxable yield. The effective taxable yield is the return that the asset gives you divided by 1 minus your tax rate. Obviously, once again, 1 minus your tax rate is going to be a number less than 1. So I'll stay again with 0.80. But notice in this case, we're not multiplying by 0.80 to reduce the number. We're dividing by 0.80. That's going to make it bigger. And that means that, if you buy a municipal bond and you earn a 5% return on it, but that 5% is tax-free, you're really earning an equivalently bigger amount because you have to factor in the tax savings. That's why it's called ETY. It's effective taxable yield or equivalent taxable yield. It's a way to adjust the return that you get to try to compare it to another asset that's taxed. As a quick aside, suppose that someone told you, hey, you can buy a corporate bond, which is taxable, and it's going to pay you 6% interest, or you can buy a municipal bond, which is tax-free, and it's going to pay you 5%. Well, at first insight, at first instinct, at first glance, you might say, oh, I'm taking the corporate bond because 6% is bigger than 5%. That's not correct. Because the 6% that you're going to earn on the corporate bond has to be discounted down, taken down for taxes, or the 5% you're earning on the tax-free bond has to be brought into account for the tax savings. The only way to compare apples to oranges on this one is to make them apples to apples. You cannot compare a taxable bond directly to a tax-free bond. You can't do it. Instead, you use this formula here to equate them, and that gives you the chance to make the proper comparison. Okay? There's a couple of other formulas, so just feel free to pause this for a moment and take these down. We have the formula for APY, annual percentage yield. This is going to be one of your better things to look for when you're comparing alternatives of where to put your cash. So let's say that you have, $5,000 that you want to set aside in short-term savings, short-term, cash management account, but you don't know which one to do. You say, oh, I have 3 or 4 different options. How do I compare them? You're typically going to want to compare the APY, the annual percentage yield. And assuming that all the options that you have are of equal risk, then you would naturally gravitate toward the asset with the higher APY because it means that you're earning relatively more money with equal risk. We have the formula for the return on a regular financial asset. So if you buy an asset and then you later sell it, we call this a capital gain. That is going to be, so the return, which we'll call R, is going to be equal to this number up here, the amount that you sold the asset for minus the amount that you purchased it for. And that's going to be divided by the amount that you paid for it. This is a variation of the classic economics formula, new minus old divided by old times 100. If you've had 1050 or other principles classes, this formula. Take the new value of an asset or of any number series, subtract the old or original value, that difference divided by the original value, that's your return rate. That's your growth rate. Same idea with an asset. And then if you have a discount instrument, we have a special formula for that one, and there it is. So these are the formulas that we have. The big idea here, because we said that cash management is all about, to one more time to go to it, where did it go to? It was about, where did it go? Here it was. It was about maximizing your earnings and minimizing fees. To maximize your earnings, you simply take the return or the effective interest rate on your different options and compare them. And if they have similar risk, you sort of gravitate or default toward the asset with the higher return. And that, my friends, is cash management. So now let's say that we understand cash management, but there are going to be times when you're going to have some debt. It might be very manageable debt that you have a credit card that you charge your stuff on to make your financial life simple and you pay it off every month. It might be longer term debt for a master's degree or a car. It might be really long-term debt for a house. But now we have to get into credit and debt. So we've got cash out of the way. Now let's go to credit. By definition, credit, broadly speaking, is any arrangement. It doesn't matter how it's structured. It's any arrangement where you get stuff now and pay for it later. There's a lot of different ways that you can be lured into credit, that credit can be offered to you. Some people, especially with this thing that's now, there's a tool now called buy now, pay later. And a lot of people say, well, it's not a credit card. It's coming out of my debit account. It's coming out of my checking account. So it's not credit. It is credit, though. Okay. Anytime that you're getting something now and paying for it later, you have debt, and that's credit. Okay. Again, like I just said, all credit implies debt. And critically, all debt implies paying interest. If you have credit, you're borrowing money. If you're borrowing money, you're paying interest. Okay. In the context of credit, which again is the money that someone else owns that you're using, interest is the price that you pay for that privilege. So again, when it was cash, interest was the price that you could charge or the benefit that you received from deploying cash that you owned. In this context, interest is the price that you pay for access to someone else's cash. And this is usually going to be the case when you're running net cash flow negative and you need to turn to the credit market to balance yourself out. What's really important to remember is that while the terms are similar, interest is interest is interest, it's tricky though, because inevitably interest on debt, meaning interest on the money that you borrow, is going to be way, way higher than interest on your cash. It's not like you're going to pay the same interest rate for money you borrow as you get from the bank. Interest on debt is always significantly higher than interest on assets. And that's why, too much debt can really suffocate you. This is especially true in recent decades, this idea of suffocation. Recent decades have seen a proliferation of lots and lots of tools. In other words, credit cards, buy now, pay later things, just all these different tools that are increasing both the opportunities and the pressures on you to overconsume, to overspend, to live beyond, to live outside of your means, and to go into debt. It's really tough out there. There's a lot of pressure on people to show status with consumption. There's a lot of pressure to keep up with what is an idealized life. There's a lot of pressure to consume conspicuously to try to impress people. So you're going to face a double whammy. On the one hand, a lot of opportunity to go into debt and a lot of pressure to live beyond your means. So you really have to really kind of be playing defensive ball here to avoid those pressures. That's where having a budget comes in. And always remember that future you needs cash. So net cash positive today. Finally, on this kind of broad overview, I am not opposed to credit or debt. In fact, when it's used correctly, credit and debt can be really, really good for you. You know, if it's used correctly, credit and debt can provide liquidity. It can definitely offer convenience. Just think about a credit card. You know, you have to carry a lot of cash. You can track all your transactions, very easy. And credit and debt can even be a tool to increase your net worth by, for example, borrowing money to get a degree, which will increase your salary later, or borrowing money to buy a home where not only can you and your family live, but it's going to appreciate in value later. So credit can be a good thing, but you have to balance those benefits against dangers. And there are always dangers that accompany debt. Number one, overspending. And along with that, we know the idea of opportunity cost. When you overspend and you go into debt, you have to pay somebody else interest. This means that someone out there, whoever loaned you the money, they effectively have a claim on your future income. They have rights to income that you haven't received yet, and you don't have that right. You have to give some of your future income away, and that deprives you of liquidity in the future. And the other big, danger is, what if you lose your job? What if something bad happens? What if your cash flow falls? You still have to pay your debt. And people get into a lot of trouble when their debt loads rise and then something happens and, they lose their job, they take a pay cut, they get their hours cut, and all of a sudden your interest burden is rising, your income is falling, and you get squeezed in that middle, and it's not a good place to be. So just be smart about your use of credit and debt. But with that said, people borrow for lots of reasons, and some of them are good. I put together here a list of some of the more common reasons why people borrow. Some of these sound familiar. Some people borrow to finance their education through student loans. A very common, and if you're smart about it, a very good use of debt, again, you have to be prudent, you have to be smart, is to get a mortgage to buy a house. Some people use debt to also improve that house, either because they just want to make it more comfortable and make it a better place to live for them and their family. Or they oftentimes will also do home improvements because they say, you know what, if I make, this thing better, if I do these fixes, it'll actually raise the value of the home even more. It kind of pays for itself at times. Other times people will use debt and borrow money to buy a car through an auto loan. Probably not a good idea. Sometimes people will use debt to finance random consumption. They'll go into debt to take a vacation or to buy fancy clothing. This is definitely a bad idea, because then you're taking debt to purchase an asset that is rapidly depreciating, and you don't want to take on debt to buy depreciating assets. Some people will take on debt to start a business. It can be good if it works for you, but it's very dangerous. And sometimes people will also take on debt. This is what we call margin in the world of finance. They'll take on debt to actually finance investments. So they'll borrow money to buy stock. That's an example. We call this margin. And it's, again, one of those things where if it works, it seems like a genius move later on because you borrowed some money, you bought some assets, the assets went up in value, you paid back the loan, you got the difference, and you're a genius. But margins can also be very dangerous. All leverage can be dangerous, and we'll discuss leverage in a later lecture. Okay, so those are some reasons why people borrow. Borrowing is strongly related to what we're going to call rating agencies, credit reports, and credit scores. Behind the scenes, in our modern financial world, behind the scenes, there's lots of information that's going on. There's lots of information that's passing and being combined and consolidated. This is done primarily by rating agencies. And there's three biggies. In America, the three biggies are Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian. These are rating agencies. And what they basically do is they combine and take in and aggregate loads and loads of data about you and about your use of credit or debt. So they take all that data and then they prepare what are known as credit reports. A credit report is basically an analysis, a very detailed analysis of all of your, basically of how you manage your credit. It summarizes your income, your current credit status, your payment history, how much your balances have been month by month, if you paid them off. Basically, all of these are aggregated, and what they provide is your general credit worthiness. Okay, so the credit agencies, these three right here, they aggregate all this data based on your income and history and payments and everything. And they then use that as a way to assess your personal credit worthiness, or as we might say, are you or are you not at risk? Okay. They do this by publishing these reports and making these reports available to lenders. So if you're going to want to go buy a car and get a car loan, the car loan company is going to run a credit report on you and try to get a sense of, hey, is this person a good risk or a bad risk? And that's obviously important because if you're a good risk, if you have good credit, you're less risky, you'll get a lower interest rate. That's good. If you've got some credit problems and maybe you haven't been all that smart about your credit use, you're going to be seen as riskier. And if you're seen as riskier, you have to pay a higher interest rate, and that's not so good. Okay. One thing that I think you should get in the habit of doing, because lenders are requesting your credit report to get a sense of who you are, you should get in the habit of also requesting your credit report. You want to see what other people see about your credit worthiness. Fortunately, our federal government makes this very easy. By law, remember, we have the big three up here, Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian. By law, each of these agencies is required by law to offer you one free credit report per year. If you go on to this website here, www.annualcreditreport.com, and go through the screens, it's really easy. You set up an account, free account to set up, and you can run your credit report and get the free report that each agency is required to give you every year. Now, some people will every January, for example, run all three. That's just on their calendar, their little financial annual calendar. January, run credit reports. It's not a bad idea. I think a better approach, though, is what we call laddering. Think about this. If you're able to get one free one per company per year, maybe you request Equifax in January, February, March, April, May. Then you request TransUnion in May, June, July, August, September. Then you request Experian in September. And then October, November, December, January, it's a new year. Then you request this one again. So if you follow the laddering strategy, you can actually get a free report every 4 months. You're just staggering who it comes from. This is a great discipline to get into because it means that every 4 months, you're going to have a chance to look at your credit report. And that's really important. You want to make sure it's accurate. And especially as we see more and more financial fraud, credit fraud out there, getting your annual credit report every 4 months from each of these or every 4 months by staggering these three agencies, you're going to catch on. If there is any credit fraud going on in your accounts, you'll see it right away. Because every 4 months, you have a fresh report. And every report lists all of your credit that you have out there, all your cards, all your debt. And if you say, wait a minute, I never took out this credit card. I've never taken out this loan. It's way better to find those errors and those frauds in 4 months as opposed to 4 years or even 10 years, in which case you're really, really, you got a problem. So consider laddering as a strategy. Now, we've talked about their agencies and the reports, but what it really comes down to is the credit score. And that's the key. What happens is all this data on your personal finances, on your history, on your payment history, on your debt usage, all these things, it's all aggregated into a score, into a number. And this number is your credit score. And ultimately, what this credit score does is it's a shorthand to show, are you more or less risky? Are you more or less credit worthy? And this credit score is used by lots of people to make lots of decisions about you. Primarily, it's used by creditors and lenders to determine, hey, is this person risky or not so risky? Because again, the more risky you are, the lower your credit score is, the higher the interest rate you have to pay. And that's not a good thing because the higher your interest rate, the more interest you pay, the more cash you lose, the bigger your opportunity cost, and you know the rest. Okay. So there's a couple of different types of credit scores. The main one that we'll concern ourselves with is called the FICO, FICO. And this is a score that ranges at a low of 300 to a high of 850. If you're at 750 or above, you're considered to have excellent credit. And if you can work really hard and get your FICO into the 800s, you are going to be really, really set for success. Because the higher that FICO score is, the better you're seen by lenders, the more likely they are to lend to you, and you're going to get a lower interest rate. Okay. Don't underestimate how important this score is. Your credit score is going to impact lending decisions generally. Are you going to get a loan or not? If you get a loan, are you going to pay a high rate or a low rate? And it's even more than that. Your ability to get an apartment, landlords check this. They don't sign leases with risky people. Get a good credit card. We talked earlier about the right tools for the job. You need the right tool for the job. And even career advancement, because in some industries, if you need a security clearance, for example, your credit score is a factor in whether or not you get a security clearance. So pay attention to your credit and protect it. How do you protect it? Well, you start off by knowing what are the factors that will influence your credit score. And there's 5. And they're listed here for you. The most important one is your payment history. Are you paying all of your credit card and all of your debt on time? That's 35%. The amount of debt that you currently have as a percentage of your limit, 30%. The length of your credit history, 15%. Now, obviously, if you're younger and you're just starting your journey, this one's going to ding you a little bit because you're just starting, but that's okay. You stay with it, and after a couple of years, you'll have a nice long credit history and you'll be okay. Okay. Has there been new credit issued to you? If you're applying for lots and lots of credit cards in a given period of time and you're opening up lots and lots of accounts, that's going to ding your score because the FICO is going to indicate that. And lenders are going to say, hey, why is this person opening so many accounts? Is there something going on? Are they having some cash flow problems? Seems a bit risky. And then finally, the mix of credit that you have. If you have a mix of credit cards, student loan payments, a car payment, just if you have a mix of different types of debt, it tends to raise your score. Once you know these 5 things, there's a few implications that these lead to. If you want a high credit score, and you do, number 1, never, ever miss a payment. This is why earlier we talked about automating, about building up that really nice human-proof infrastructure. If you can just set up auto pay, you'll never miss a payment and your score will be great. Always, not only do you not want to miss a payment, but you want to pay all your bills on time. Don't be late. You're going to have, with all of your different credit tools, you're going to have a total available credit limit. You want to keep your credit usage at about, well, how about this? At most 15%. So if you have a credit card limit of $10,000, 15% of 10,000 is 1,500. You don't want to run usage above that number. And then, because again, the length of your history is a factor, whenever possible, especially when you're on your beginning of your journey, you open up a credit card right away. Try to keep your old accounts open whenever possible, because that increases your credit history, which raises your score. All right. With that said, let's move on to the capacity ratios. I had set up here that lenders and creditors look at your credit score, and therefore you should too, because you want to see what they see. Same thing here. We have in finance this tool called capacity ratio, and we'll go into them right now. Big idea is that lenders, when they're deciding if you're going to get a loan or not, lenders are going to analyze your credit capacity. Credit capacity is basically, are you going to have the ability to pay this off, or are you going to be a threat to default? They use 2 main metrics to judge this. My view is, in much the same way that since lenders use your credit score to make judgments about you, you should also know your credit score. To me, it also makes sense. If lenders are going to apply 2 metrics to judge your credit capacity, why don't you learn those 2 metrics and apply them to yourself to make sure that you know what they know? Here's the 2. The first is your debt payment to disposable income ratio. It's also called the debt safety ratio. This is equal to your, let's get this highlighted for you. This is equal to, let me do this here. Your debt payment to disposable income ratio, also called your debt safety ratio, is equal to your total monthly debt payments divided by your net monthly income. Now, critically, this excludes mortgage payments. So the debt payments on your mortgage don't go into this ratio. The goal is to keep this below 20%. Smaller is better. The smaller this number is, the smaller this ratio is, the better you're looking. But you do not want to have this one get bigger than 20%. Sometimes, by the way, you'll hear lenders call this one your front end ratio. The second one that we're going to talk about, we'll do it in different color, is known as the debt to income ratio. This one is known informally as the back end ratio. And this one is equal to your monthly debt payments divided by your gross monthly income, meaning before taxes. Notice that this one includes all your monthly debt payments, including your mortgage. And the target for this, 36% max. Notice that this one is bigger than this one, in part because it includes your mortgage payments. But you want to keep your front end ratio below 20% and your back end ratio below 36%. If you can hit these ratios, you're going to demonstrate a high credit capacity and be rewarded with better loan options and better interest rates. Okay? Now, let's wrap up our discussion by quickly parsing out consumer debt. So again, we had said at the beginning that when it comes to spending, it's either cash that you own or credit where you borrow. On the credit side, there's two additional categories. Credit can be known as open-ended credit or closed-ended credit. So in the next couple of slides, we're going to dissect this, okay? So we have first, let's go back to our original color, consumer credit, open-ended. And again, all consumer credit can be categorized as either open-end or closed-end. It depends on how it's structured. Open-ended credit, which is the subject of this slide, is also known as revolving credit. The main example here would be a credit card. So if you have a credit card that you use, you have revolving credit. You have open-ended credit. And if you have a credit card, what I'm about to say sounds pretty straightforward because you do it all the time. With open-ended credit, you are able to buy different items, all kinds of items, pretty much everything that's legal to buy. You can buy different items from different vendors, or you can take cash advances and borrow money. And you can do all of that. You can buy any product as long as it's legal. You can borrow any money through a cash advance, or you can buy any product up to a certain limit. And that limit is called your credit limit or your line of credit. Periodically, generally every month, you're going to get a statement. And that statement will list all your transactions and critically list your total balance due. And the reason why open-ended credit is called open is because not only can you buy lots of different things from lots of different vendors up to your credit limit, but when your statement comes in and you've got this total balance due, you have options. You have options. You can either pay the balance due in full, or you can pay a portion of the balance due. If you have a credit card and you get your statement in, you know you don't have to pay the full balance off. You can make the minimum payment. So with open-ended credit, you can either pay it off in full or pay it off in part. Obviously, the best move is to pay it off in full because here's the critical thing. If you pay it off in full, you don't pay interest. Think about that. You have a credit card, you charge all this stuff. If you pay the balance in full every month, you never pay interest on your credit card. It's like getting an interest-free loan. but it requires that you pay it off in full every month. If, on the other hand, you decide to only pay a portion of the balance due, then, my friend, you will have to pay interest and finance charges and bear that opportunity cost. The obvious takeaway is don't charge a lot and pay your balance in full. Okay. Credit cards, like we said, are the most common form of open-ended credit. When you have a credit card, you're basically borrowing money. You never thought about it that way, but think about this. When you buy something on a credit card, you swipe it or you tap it, you're getting the item that day. You can use it right then and there. You're not having to pay for it until maybe weeks later when your statement arrives. So you are borrowing money. You can borrow this money up to your credit limit, which is established by your company, and at the interest rate, which is known as the APR that your credit card carries. When you get your monthly statement, every month it comes in, you have one of two choices. Pay it in part or pay it in full. If you pay it in part, you're going to have to pay interest charges. If you pay it in full, it's interest-free. Okay, that's credit cards. Later on, we'll go into some more detail and we'll dissect the statement. But for now, just see that credit cards are open-ended credit. These are, in my opinion, I'm a fan of credit cards. I'm not a fan of debt, but if you can pay your credit card off every month, they're a really good tool. You can simplify your life. It makes it really easy to track your expenses for your cash flow statements. Some cards give you cash back or frequent flyer points or other things like that that have value. So credit cards can be a very effective cash management tool. And if you have the discipline, they're great to use. But remember, we have to balance costs and benefits. And the reality is, for people who tend to be a bit more impulsive, for people who spend beyond their means, for people who maybe don't have good budgeting or financial discipline, these can be really, really, really troubling because it makes it super easy to spend beyond your means. So that was open-ended credit. Now let's talk about closed-ended credit. Closed-end, the other type of credit, this is not credit cards. In contrast, closed-ended credit refers to one-time loans. These loans are taken out for a specific purpose and they're paid back in a specified period of time. The complete opposite of a credit card. Credit cards, it's revolving. You can just charge and charge and charge. Closed-ended credit, it's a one-time loan. Credit cards, you can buy whatever you want to buy. Closed-ended credit, it's taken out for a specific purchase, usually like a car loan, a mortgage, a loan to buy furniture or appliances for your home. You're taking out a loan for a very specific purpose. And unlike credit cards, which lets you pay it off if you want, not you have to pay it off eventually, but you can pay the amount that you want in full or in part. With closed-ended credit, there is a very detailed and specific payment schedule that you have to follow. Examples, the most common ones, student loans, mortgages, car loans, appliance, furniture loans. These loans, they can vary in really kind of trivial way, not trivial, but kind of, subtle ways. They can vary based on whether you pay them off over time or in one chunk payment. They can vary based on their interest rate, whether it's fixed or variable. And these loans can be sort of different based on whether they're secured or unsecured. So there's some subtleties within it, but they all end up behaving in the same way at the big level. You're getting a loan for a certain amount of money to buy a particular item or set of items with a very particular payback schedule. Now, these loans, there's actually 5 different ways that these loans can be structured. So it gets very confusing. And unfortunately, the financial sector, they have a lot of jargon to kind of confuse people on this. We'll learn later about the 5 types. And there's 5 distinct types of closed-ended loans, and they behave in subtly different ways. But generally, the most common ones, if you take one out, the most common type of loan that you're going to have is going to be called a simple interest installment loan. Okay. The most common type of closed-ended credit is the simple interest installment loan. This also goes by the name amortized loan or declining balance loan. Once again, I'm sorry, but once again, it's multiple terms for the same idea. But there are other types of loans, including add-on or discount loans, and later on we'll learn about all 5 types. But for today, I want to focus on the simple interest installment loan. And that takes us to our last part of this lecture, the cost of credit. We know the benefits of credit. You get access to things now, and you could buy a house or a car. I mean, so there's some definite advantages to credit, but there's also disadvantages. And the primary disadvantage, in other words, the opportunity cost involved, is interest. Because whenever you borrow money, you have to pay it back. You have to pay back the amount that you borrowed, but you also have to pay interest or finance. In other words, you have to pay money for the privilege of borrowing. And this interest or finance charge, this is the cost of credit. It's going to be determined primarily by the interest rate that you borrow at. The higher the interest rate of your loan or of your credit card, the higher interest you have to pay. Lower interest rates imply lower interest payments. So whenever you're starting to look for loans or any kind of credit tool, you're going to really want to be thinking about opportunity cost. And the key thing you're looking at is called the APR. APR stands for the annual percentage rate. And it is the most comprehensive interest rate number because it shows not just the interest rate, but also the fees that go with the loan. So whenever you're comparing different loan opportunities, assuming they have equal benefit, you're going to turn to the APR and gravitate toward the loan with the lower APR. Okay. I want to talk now in 2 more specifics, and then we'll call it a lecture. Let's talk about the finance charges on a credit card. Remember, credit cards were open-end. And I said that when your statement comes, you can pay it off in full or in part. If you pay it off in full, no interest, good job for you. But if you don't pay it in full, you're paying interest. So how is that calculated? And it's basically an extension of this. We learned before that interest is equal to P times R times T, that the interest rate that you pay is equal to the principal times the rate times the time. When it comes to a credit card, this is just a little bit, an extension of it, and it's this. When it comes to a credit card, the interest or finance charge that you pay is equal to your daily periodic rate times your ADB times the number of days in the cycle. Let's break these 3 things down. The daily periodic rate is equal to your credit card's APR. A stands for annual. So the APR divided by 365 is the daily rate. Again, APR is the annual rate. If you divide the APR by 365, that's your daily rate. That's the first variable. The second variable is your ADB. Now, credit card companies have a couple of different ways that they can calculate the principal and the basis for your debt, the basis for your interest charge. But generally, most credit card companies today follow the ADB method. And what the ADB, or the average daily balance, is, it's the sum of all the balances that you owe on your credit card every day, added together, and divided by the number of days in the billing period. So again, they take your daily balance every day, they add that together, and then they divide that by the number of days in the billing cycle to get the average daily balance. And then number 3 is the number of days in the cycle. This sounds hard. It's really straightforward, and it's the key to understanding credit card debt. So let's do an example. Let's take a simple month. You have a credit card, and your billing cycle spans from April 1st to April 30th. And let's say that on April 1st, you have a balance of $200. Notice that if you have a balance on the first day of the billing cycle, it implies that you carried over a balance from your previous window. And if you carried over a balance from your previous window, that implies that you did not pay that credit card off in full, so you're going to be paying some interest. So how much interest? Well, April 1st, you owe $200. You don't do anything until a few days later, April 12th, you charge $135. Now note that your balance is 200 plus 135, or 335. And then your balance stays at 335 for another couple of weeks or so until April 25th, when you send in a payment of 110. So again, you started off with the balance of 200. Then a few days later, you charged 135. So now your balance is 335. Then a couple of weeks later, you paid 110. So now your balance goes from 335 to 225. And I've summarized that here. Look here. Ultimately, you had 11 days with a balance of 200 from here to here. You had 13 days with a balance of 335 from here to there. And you had 6 days from the 25th until the close with a balance of 225. 11 times 200 is here. 13 times 335 is here. 6 times 225 is here. Multiply, 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 add them all together. Your total daily balances, the sum of each day balance, is $79.05. You then take that $79.05, divide it by the number of days in the billing cycle, which is 30, and you get this critical number of $263.50. And that is your average daily balance. So let's get this here. Your ADB is $263.50. Now let's turn to your rate. Assume that you have an APR of 18%. Well, you divide the APR of 18% by 365, and you get this number here. And that is your daily periodic rate. And remember, it's important to know credit cards compound your interest daily. They're charging the interest rate based on the daily balance. So we have to get to our daily. Let's put this all together. We know again that interest equals PRT. It equals your daily periodic rate times your ADB times the number of days in the cycle. In other words, the interest equals 263.50 times your daily rate times 30. And this is the interest that you're on the hook for this month because you didn't pay your balance off last month. Okay? When you take all of this together, now your new balance is $200 previous balance plus 135, the amount that you charged, minus 110, the amount that you paid, plus 3.90, your interest. And therefore, when you get your next statement, your balance will be 228.90. At which point, you'll have two options. Pay it off in full, send in a payment of 228.90, and there's no interest next period, or pay a portion of it, carry the remaining balance forward, and pay some interest. And that's how credit cards work. And finally, we'll talk now about the cost of credit. So up here, we talked about credit card finance charges for open-end credit. Now let's talk about installment loan finance charges for closed-end credit. Now again, there's 5 different types of installment loans, and they all behave differently, and I'll go through them at a different time. But for now, since the most common type of loan is the simple interest installment loan, we're going to cover that one. Now, the big thing to understand is with a simple interest installment loan, the most common type of installment loan, when you pay it off, we use the word amortize to pay it off. When you amortize the loan, when you pay off the loan, you're going to do it by making a series of regularly scheduled payments over time, usually monthly. If you have a mortgage for 30 years, 30 times 12 is 360. You're going to pay off your mortgage by making a monthly payment each and every month 360 times. You have a car loan, you're making monthly payments to retire the loan, okay? Now, we're going to assume that the mortgage rate is fixed. Sorry, pardon me. We're going to assume that the interest rate is fixed because that makes our calculations easier. So we're going to assume that the amount of loan payment that you make, in other words, your monthly payment, is going to stay constant over the life of the loan. And we're going to calculate that payment, or how about not calculate yet? The amount of the monthly payment is going to be a function of 3 factors. The loan's principal amount, how much did you borrow? The loan's interest rate, what rate are you paying? And the loan's maturity, how long do you have to pay it off? Are you paying off in 3 years or 5 years or 10 years or 30 years for a mortgage? Okay, those 3 factors will dictate it. Now, here's where it gets very, very interesting. We just said a moment ago that a portion of each payment, well, we didn't say this. We said a moment ago that each payment is going to be fixed. So you're going to make the same payment every month. We said earlier in the lecture, however, that when you borrow money, you have to pay back both the principal and the interest. So this is the very interesting thing here. You're making this fixed payment. You're making this fixed payment. Every month, you're sending this payment in. While the payment itself is fixed, a portion of the payment will go to the loan's interest and a portion will go to the principal. So let's say hypothetically you have a loan and you're paying $300 monthly payments on it. Every month, you're going to send in $300. Easy. Every month, a piece of that 300 will go toward the principal and a piece will go toward the interest. Here's the formulas that tell us how it happens. The portion that goes toward interest is equal to the loan's outstanding balance multiplied by the periodic interest rate. And then the amount that goes toward principal is going to be equal to the total amount paid minus the interest portion. So that's how it's going to work. Every payment's fixed with a piece going to interest and a piece going to principal. And now here's the other really tricky part about this. With every payment that you make, it's going to be allocated to interest and principal, but the amounts will pivot. And basically, over time, with every payment that you make, more and more of each payment is allocated to principal. And less goes to interest. So we said a moment ago that, you're going to send in $300 a month, it was. Early on in the loan, a lot of that $300 will go toward interest and very little will go toward principal. But as the loan matures and as it proceeds and as you start paying over time with each payment, it pivots. And more of your payment goes to principal and less goes to interest. So it's not like, it's weird because every month you're sending the same payment in, but the proportions that go to interest and principal shift. The general rule is early on in a loan, the bulk of your payment goes to interest and very little goes to principal. But as the loan goes on and on and on, it pivots. And at the end of a loan, most of your payment goes to principal and very little goes to interest. Now, this sounds hard, and it's it's confusing until you know it. It's not a hard concept, but it's not intuitive. So let's do a quick example to wrap up this lecture. We're going to assume for this that you're going to borrow $80,000. So you're going to get an auto loan. Auto loans, by the way, are a great example of a simple interest installment loan or an amortized loan. So that's what we're going to use. We're going to assume that you're going to borrow $80,000, 7% interest, 5-year loan. And to make this easy, we're going to make annual payments. Okay? We're going to need to think about 3 questions. Question 1, how big is your annual payment going to be? In other words, how much money do you have to pay every year to retire this loan in 5 years? The answer is not going to be 80,000 divided by 5, because 80,000 is just your principal, and your payment has to account for both the principal and the interest. Okay. Number 2, how will the loan amortize over its life? Meaning, with each payment that you make, how will it shift between interest and principal? And then number 3, given all of this, how much interest are you actually paying? So there's a few ways that we can do this. I, of course, like to organize myself, so you should too, to start off. So let's start off by getting some terms. P, V, F, V, N, I, and here, make this better. Do it over here. PV, FV, NI, and PMT. Now, the present value is $80,000 because that's how much money you're receiving. Since you're paying the loan off in 5 years, I think it was, in 5 years, future value is 0 because when it's paid off, you don't owe anything. N is going to be 5 because we're making annual payments on a 5-year loan. The interest rate is 7%, or we can say 0.07, and we're solving for the PMT. So that's one way to look at it. So we have to answer our first question. What's our annual payment? And there's actually a few ways that we can solve this. There's 3 actually. There is an annual payment formula. And that formula is A equals P times R times 1 plus R to the N over 1 plus R to the N minus 1. So this formula here, let me double check it. A equals P times R multiplied by 1 plus R to the N divided by 1 plus R to the N minus 1. Yeah, so this formula, if you were to plug in your different numbers, you would get the payment. It's okay. Kind of clunky though. It's a bit messy and, it's a tough one, but you could plug numbers in and do it. So that's the first method. But we're not going to do that. We're going to go with a different method. We also know from our time value discussion. So our first method was the formula method. Our second method is going to be our TVM method. We learned in a previous lecture that the present value of an annuity, and again, a loan is an annuity because we're making a series of annual payments to pay it off. So we can just take our annuity knowledge. The present value of an annuity is equal to the payment multiplied by the present value interest factor for a given percentage and N. In this case, 80,000 will be equal to the PMT multiplied by the PVIFA for 7% 5. Now again, let's get this right. Present value interest factor for 7% 5. So we're going to go to table A4. Present value interest factor for annuity at 7% and 5. And our magic number here, 4.1002. So 80,000 is going to be equal to the PMT times 4.1002. And therefore, the PMT is simply 80,000 divided by that, which is going to be equal to $19,511.24. So that's our second way of solving it. Of course, there's an even easier way. We could just plug the numbers into a financial calculator. Let's do it. N, let me get this up and running. There we go. N is going to be 5 years. Got that. The interest rate per year was going to be 7. The present value, which is how much we're taking out, is going to be 80,000. And the future value is going to be 0. I should have cleared it first. I already practiced this one. If we hit go, there it is. You see up on top, the PMT is negative 19,511.26. Negative means that you have to pay it. So that's our answer. $19,511.26. Off by some rounding errors. We're just going to say 19,511. Easy. So that's our payment. Now, notice over here on the TVM table, I think it does this. Look, it also gives us the amortization table. If you look here under schedule, you see that the third column is PMT. We're making the exact same payment every year, 19, 5, 11, 26. But look at the fourth column. Look at the amount that is going toward interest. Every year, less and less and less and less goes to interest. In the first year, $5,600 went to interest. Well, if you're paying 19,511 and 5,600 is going to interest, only the difference, 19,511 minus 5,600, is going to principal. And that's what reduces us. So if you were to take a look and get a calculator out, you would see that you're making a payment of 19,511. Of that, 5,600 goes to interest. That means that 13,911, 19,511 minus 5,600, 13,911 goes to principal. You subtract that 13,911 from the original balance of 80,000, and that's $66,089, and that's the future value. In other words, that's the balance of the loan at the end of year one. The balance of the loan at the end of year one becomes the basis for the year two interest. And since the balance is lower, there's less interest being paid on it. So the interest proportion drops from 5,600 to 4,626. And again, you can see over time, it accelerates and it pivots. Every year, the payment's the same, but less and less and less goes to interest and more and more goes to principal. Okay? And then our final question was, we got that part, how much total interest will you pay? Well, you could simply do 19,511 times 5. And if you do that, 19,511 times 5 is equal to 97,555. If you're paying 19,511 5 times, you're paying a total of 97,000, but only 80,000 was for the item that you bought. You subtract 80,000, and that means, my friends, that you are paying a whopping $17,555 in total interest, which should be causing you to think, is that an opportunity cost that I'm willing to bear, or could that money go to other uses? But anyway, that's how we run the calculations for the most common type of loan, the auto loan or the mortgage loan, the student loan. They all behave this way, okay? And now we have some exposure to how to calculate both closed-end and open-end debt tool interest charges. Given all this, let's wrap it up. What are some rules to take away from this? I ultimately want you, if you're going to use credit, to use it well and to use it for your benefit. So what are some broad principles that you should follow? And again, I'm a real big believer in principles. Remember, the tools will always change. There will be tools in the next 5, 10 years that you'll have access to that don't even exist today. Okay? Finance is always evolving. So while the tools will always change, the rules or the principles are constant. So we learn the rules and principles to apply them to the new tools. What are the rules that I would recommend? Well, as always, you start every financial decision with a thought about your personal and family vision, your goals, and about what's best for future you. Create a budget and adhere to it. Only take on debt to acquire assets. Should I put a period there? Sorry about that. Only take on debt to acquire assets that will appreciate in value. I gave the example of an auto loan. You do not want to take out a loan for a car. It is a bad, bad move. You're going to be paying interest for years and the asset's depreciating in value. I know it's tough love and tough medicine, but if you can't afford to pay for a car in cash, you shouldn't get the car. You only take on debt to acquire assets that appreciate in value, not that depreciate. If you're going to use credit cards, use them to buy items that were already in your budget because your budget's planned out. Don't use credit cards to binge or to live beyond your means. No matter how you use the credit card, to what extent, you must commit to paying it off every month, and you're going to want to automate that process so you never miss a payment. If you can automate the process to pay your credit card bill off in full, two great things happen. You never pay interest because you pay it off in full. That's good. And you build up a credit history and your credit score goes higher, and that's also good. Okay. I recommend that you set up spending alerts, email alerts, or text message alerts so that you can get in real time alerts when anything is charged on your credit card. That's an easy way to protect against fraud. Work really, really hard to build a clean credit report and to earn a high FICO score. And once you have that clean credit report and that good FICO score, work even harder to protect it. Review those scores and reports annually to make sure you're keeping good progress. And then finally, remember, this is a life lesson in finance and everything else. It's always easier to avoid a problem than to fix a problem. Start with a clean slate, build your credit score up, maintain good discipline. That's not hard. Getting into trouble and then having to unbury yourself, that's really rough. Don't try to fix problems. Try to avoid problems. Okay? The final conclusion part, I open this lecture with a discussion of the tools for the job, and we've now gone through the jobs. So what are the tools that you need? What are the 4 tools that you need in order for you to do this well? Number 1, you need a checking account. A good, no-fee checking account. This is the hub. It's like the train station for your finances. All your money flows into it from your pay. All your payments go out of it. Checking account. Number 2, you need a high yield savings account. There's a lot of types now. You have high yield online savings accounts, you have CDs, you have money market accounts, you even have traditional savings accounts, but their interest is usually pretty poor. But either way, you're going to be saving money every month. You don't want to leave all that excess cash in your checking account. You want to move a bit of it into your savings account to generate some interest on your excess cash. You do want to get an appropriate credit card. By appropriate, I mean no fee and one that has benefits that appeal to you. Okay? You need a credit card. And then finally, you need a system to just organize and file your records and keep yourself nice and clean. All these together become for you your financial infrastructure. So, with all that said, we end every lecture with a call to action. Here are some things that you can commit to in the next couple of weeks to start building up this financial future for yourself. If you don't already have these tools, in the next few weeks, take some action and open a no-fee checking account. Set up automatic deposits for all of your income sources to get automatically put into your checking account. Automate the deposits. Set a savings goal and set an emergency fund target goal. You have to get ready for the rainy day. How much do you need? Then once you have the savings and the emergency fund goal, open up a high yield savings account to hold that money. and then set up automatic, again, always automating, building up a great infrastructure that's human proof. Set up automated monthly transfers so that cash will automatically go from your checking account into your savings account and into your emergency fund till you build up to your goal level. Of course, you know now that this requires NCF positive life. You're going to get an appropriate no fee or low fee credit card. You're going to automate all of your recurring expenses to your credit card to simplify your life and to get some frequent flyer points or cash back or whatever you're going to get. You're going to link your credit card to your checking account so that once again, you're going to automate all your payments. So you never miss a payment. You never pay interest. You win-win. The credit card companies work for you, basically. You don't work for them. You're going to set up a spending alert to protect yourself against fraud. And then finally, because I said before that this is all about infrastructure, you're going to draw a money map. A money map is a very simple diagram where you put a circle for each of your accounts, and then you simply draw lines and arrows to connect the accounts and show how they're related. I'll put one together for you in a later lecture, but for now, I think we've done enough. Thanks for your time. Remember, using your money or other people's money is an essential part of handling your day-to-day life. If it's your money, cash you own, you earn interest. If it's someone else's money, credit, whether open-ended or closed-ended, you pay interest. Know those opportunity costs, know the tools for the job. I wish you guys, as always, good luck, and thanks for your time, and I'll talk to you next time. Take care.